Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the 50 years series of talks about being in ISKCON for 50 years and what that experience was like. Just say a prayer to begin. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Bhastai Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Bhaskachade Satarane Vanchikopaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. So I did so far up to now 18 talks. Some people thought that I was finished because I stopped putting them up. And really I just had a break and, things happening in life that have slowed me down. But I'm hoping to continue on and bring us up to today and go through these different times in ISKCON and what our experiences were. And just a reminder that this is not meant to be real high spiritual philosophical discussions, but just, simply to give some perspective on what my own experiences were throughout the last 50 years, not, because they're particularly unique, but actually just the opposite, because they're so normal, experiences of stories of the simple rank and file devotee, and a woman, and for many years a single woman. And because this kind of history, it's not really there in Lilamrita. It's just more the practical life of aspiring devotees. In this section I'll talk about, marriage, family, and, just the ground reality of what we have been through and how we manage to go through it, practical things. Because, we are aspiring for this highest spiritual understanding and attainment, but, we have to go through so much on the ground as we're aspiring for that high thing, so getting back to where we were, we've only gone to the end of the 80s. And there's a few things that I want to add about the end of the 80s, the last couple years of that decade, and then moving forward. So the last time, I think the last class we're discussing about the 80s being, a tumultuous and devastating decade. And there's a few things I had brought to the point where I explained that I had moved to Vrindavan. That was probably towards the end of 86. And living by the mercy of my dear friends Sunita and Tosan Krishna, who had a lovely house just near the temple in Vrindavan, and they gave me a little kutir, it was a servant's quarters, to live in, where I could work on IVS work, the Institute for Vaishnava Studies, do some editing, and continue with my deity worship, doing all the outfits and getting deities made and all of that. So that would continue on. And I had started this work for the IVS. Is very enlivening because a lot of the books that they were having translated for their academic work, it wasn't to be published necessarily, but books like Narottam Vilas and Prem Vilas and Shyamananda Prakash. These were books that had not, at that time, we didn't have any English translations. So this was the first, doors opening up to these stories and these wonderful histories of our Vaishnavacharyas. So to me, that was enlivening. I remember working for quite some time with maybe many devotees had this new Dadu, who was a very special, elderly Bengali devotee who had joined ISKCON, which was really, it was unusual in those days that, an elderly person would be joining. It was mostly younger people. And so Dadu was a real gentleman and a scholar. And so he used to sit with me sometimes for hours, and he would help me go through this Shyamananda Prakash, this editing and understanding. So this was a very nice work for me to absorb myself in. And it was the beginning of working on computers. This is a new thing. And the IVS provided me with a small, laptop computer with no hard drive, but 2 floppy drives. That was like, state of the art. It was a wonderful thing, an amazing thing that we started to use, and how that has changed our lives. So amazing. So this was the beginning for me. And, so I was busy, and I was happy to be in Vrindavan, despite the fact that it was turbulent times elsewhere. So when there's turbulent times, I would say good to find a spot where, you can be a little bit away from all the turbulence, and it helps you to pass through the times, But, the reports of what was going on, especially in Europe, in Bhagavan Zone, where I had spent, so much time, invested so much of my life, hearing the news, it would come in. I mean, no internet in those days, so filtering in slowly, and it was very disturbing. And, because things were very difficult there, and in many places in the world, not everywhere, but many places were. And I have to say that I felt guilty sometimes, that I was not there and trying to help out. But I knew that there really wasn't much that I could do, and even, wasn't really very welcome in one sense. Being an American, being a former supporter of Bhagavan. And so, I couldn't do anything, but the disturbances that were happening in ISKCON, although I felt really nicely situated, it started to scare me, as I'm sure it did for many other devotees, because I never felt up to this point, despite, there's always been issues, problems, this and that, but I never felt that we were on shaky ground. But I started to wonder, what is going to happen with our movement? And, it hit me that anything is possible, that things, and it was a shock. I remember when it hit me, that look at what happened in the Gaudiya Math, and they were much more senior and cultured and experienced devotees than us. And so I remember very clearly just a moment when I was walking and thinking about things. I was just immersed in this, and I was walking from the temple to my little kutir, and I was thinking deeply about this, about the future of ISKCON, and feeling scared. And I just remember the spot. I stopped in my tracks, and I really started to pray, really fervently, as, we do sometimes when we get really scared. And, tears in my eyes. And, it was just one of those times where, I really begged, please, Srimati Radharani, whatever happens to this movement, just please keep me in the association of Srila Prabhupada's, sincere servants. And, then somehow or another, everything will be okay. So, that was my prayer. And, because as a single woman in India, which was rare, I had to walk on eggshells a bit, make sure I didn't bring any unnecessary attention to myself. And I didn't mind that. I was very aware that to be living in Vrindavan is such an incredible shelter and so rare for any living entity. What to speak, some little Malecha girl from, Detroit City. How was I able to be there? And so, I felt undeserving and I felt grateful. And so that, whatever I had to do to continue to stay there, that was just fine with me. If I had to walk on eggshells, that's fine. It's not a big deal. But, because it was a big change for like 17, 18 years. I was working under one authority, and that is the way things were done in those days. Everyone worked under an authority, and we didn't just do whatever we felt like doing. We worked under someone. And in some ways, that was a kind of a protection that I didn't really realize until I didn't have it anymore. I could see that, I was pretty vulnerable now. I could very easily be sent away or pushed around now. And, sometimes wondered, well, how will we be, who will protect me from our so-called protectors? And, so it was a different situation. Life had changed. And I had made a decision to come to Vrindavan on my own. I had asked senior devotees and gotten their blessing, permission. But I was on my own and not under authority. And although I wasn't unhappy, I began to wonder if I was properly situated. What would Srila Prabhupada say? And I began to wonder, maybe I should be married, to be more properly situated. And so I went before Srimati Radharani, just in uncertainty. And I really prayed again very hard to her. Somehow, beautiful Srimati Radharani in Vrindavan, she's that so beautiful, her face and she's such a shelter, And of course, that's a very high thing. But I did go to her. That was who I felt inclined to send my prayers. Of course, they go, hopefully, through Srila Prabhupada and upwards to her. But I said, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking to remain single or to marry. I'm just asking, what do you want? What would Srila Prabhupada want? And just please give me the intelligence, to understand what that is, what is best for my spiritual life. And, I'm pretty thick, so please, make it obvious to me in some way. Please, give some clear indication, And so to this point, I hadn't really thought much about being married. Of course, it comes up in the mind, but, and I sort of assumed, that I might get married one day. But the thing is, time's running out. I'm getting in my late 30s, And so it's, well, maybe not, okay. It was a disturbing idea to me, and I hadn't thought much about having children. I didn't have a strong drive. I didn't have an aversion either, but it's just, I just didn't think about that much. And sometimes that's a very, very strong driving force for women, a natural urge, to have a child. Now fortunately, I just wasn't being pressured by that urge throughout my life, so obviously it made it easier for being single. So I think that being very busy in devotional service and having many close friends and living always in close proximity with many devotees, I felt that I had family. I didn't feel like, oh, I'm so lonely, I'm all alone, I'm single. I didn't feel that way because of the way the society was at that time. There was some family spirit, although this was breaking down in many ways. But I'm a bit of an introvert, and I like being alone. So, of course, I did describe that I had a problem at one point, and I did have another, kind of close call, but worked through things and was more aware of the danger of Maya and how she works, But so now I, after making this prayer to Srimati Radharani, then I made some small and private attempt to explore the possibility of marriage, as there had been a good possibility in the past. But what transpired after I made that effort, it seemed to indicate very clearly to me that no, I should not go in that direction, that I should just keep doing what I'm doing. And I accepted that, and I felt okay with that, and it was a bit of a relief just, not to be on the mental plane, So, because my life now had significantly changed amidst ISKCON's changes, and, so I now had this tiny room, but also have to think to support myself, as I'd always worked under the temple, and whatever my needs were just kind of provided. So I had to consider, but it wasn't difficult. That was, IVS offered to give me $50 a month, and that was more than I needed. Imagine. And really, it was like, rolling in cash. And, life was simple. Life was simple in Vrindavan. And so that was nice. And I don't say that everything, was peaches and cream. And, my struggles were there, but my struggles were mainly with myself, mostly related to Tamaguna, that, I had always this difficulty with constant fatigue. I've just always struggled with this being tired. And so, everything in life has always felt like a physical struggle for me, just to push myself, to the everyday things, just to rise early, to chant. And, it was never easy. Decades on, still didn't become easy, but I did it, So, I'm just saying these things because to show how every individual has their individual struggle. And sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it, it's visible to others or not. But, the point is that we each are coming into Krishna consciousness. We have different starting points. We didn't just we're all the same age and from the same background, and therefore we just started like this and we all together move forward. It's not like that. Some of us maybe just really just starting first lifetime in devotional service. And yet you could see that there were many people that were just way ahead of you just from the day they joined, right from the beginning. So it's just to bring up, to demonstrate that, that even those who are struggling are not great devotees, and, just ordinary people like myself, that you can, despite so many difficulties, we can make it. We can push through. It is possible. And we have to, but it's important that we have to find what carries each of us the best. And that's personal, that's individual. It's not, one way, and what carried me, despite, low energy and low enthusiasm sometimes, was that, I was just swept along or carried by one thing, is the environment of the Dham. It's just so uplifting. It was so helpful to me. It's not that way for everyone, but it was for me. And also the energy and the enthusiasm of other devotees. That association is such a gift. I think alone, what would I have done? I don't think I would have done, so much of what I did. But to just do it by myself, but other devotees, their enthusiasm, they just you just get swept along in that current of others' enthusiasm, So, these are survival tactics. How do we survive? How do we keep going? How do we keep on the path despite so many things, And I think another important aspect for survival, we know very well, is just chanting 16 rounds. However, bad they might be. But I have become totally convinced of the protective circle that creates around you. It doesn't mean that bad stuff isn't going to happen. It doesn't mean, but it means that, you are protected, because by this time I have seen many joining, leaving, rising and falling. Really wonderful devotees going up and going down, And, I think, if I think about it, well, why did I stay? I think many devotees, that I think of that left at one point, I think, they just had so much better qualities and characteristics and had done so much more service than me, I wonder why, and what I've come to is that despite whatever, I've always chanted my rounds, and not necessarily attentively and not necessarily with taste, but I do believe that it is a saving grace, because in exploring other devotees that I know, friends or people that, did fall away, I know that in every instance that I know of, they were not chanting, or they stopped their chanting. And then, you're out of the protective circle and grabbed by Maya. That's just a personal realization. I cannot think of any other reason that I'm still hanging in, So, and this is one of the instructions that Prabhupada just endlessly repeated. It's important to hear those instructions that Prabhupada emphasized. There's so many things that you can do, but Prabhupada was just you must chant your rounds. You must, it's not a huge amount of things that he emphasized, but he said again and again and again. And I have full faith that, if you really do stick to those things, somehow or another, through, whatever hellish or happy things come our way, that somehow that means holding on to Srila Prabhupada. And that's for all generations, whoever the guru is, because your guru should be saying the same as what Srila Prabhupada said, you know. So I'm just saying these things because everyone's going to go through challenging times. I mean, it has to be. And just that, you know, it's possible to make it through, but we have to know, take shelter, you know, in those things. It's not the basic instructions. It's not rocket science. And Srila Prabhupada told us again and again the basic instructions. And I see that without that, even the smartest, most clever or scholarly people, you know, they can get deviated, you know. And, you know, one thing that gave me a real boost spiritually, I've mentioned before, was parikrama, you know, that, you know, I started doing the Vrindavan parikrama many years ago and went on the Brajmana parikrama. And now around this time, I was introduced to the wonders of Govardhan parikrama. And so I went as often as possible with various friends, and I tried to do it in a variety of ways. You know, there's so many ways you can do Govardhan parikrama. You know, really slowly, stopping at each place, or, you know, a lot of people like to do the super fast, or you do the inner route, you do the outer route, or, you know, no stops, lots of stops, you know, but every time it was always unique. And it was always an enlivening experience. And sometimes it was just like a breeze. And sometimes it felt absolutely like impossible to finish. Like, I'm going to drop dead out here. And it was like the hill, you know, just shrinks or grows at different times, you know. So it was, and there was one devotee, I want to mention him because it was one of the things that I want to do with these talks, is to mention devotees that a lot of people, maybe they don't know, you know, that were just amazing people. And Padma Lochan is one of them, a very eccentric person. But, you know, he was way ahead of his time. Like, before we even knew about Govardhan Parikrama, practically, he had written already a Govardhan Parikrama guidebook, you know. So I went out with him one time. He was taking the temple devotees, you know, it was like a festival time, so he was taking a busload, and they had 3 different buses, and they were going to be led by different devotees. One was going to go fast, and one not, and Padma Lochan was going to go the more slow way. So I thought, I'll go with him. So when I went with him, and it was like, he could stop, you know, like every 50 feet, and he would have a story, and he'd have something to tell about, and he's just sauntering around the hill and just having a fantastic time, and it was wonderful. But, you know, after 4 hours, you know, I knew that we were only about a quarter of the way around. And, you know, so I asked him, you know, are you like planning to finish this parikrama today? And he said, oh, maybe. And I knew that most everybody in the crowd, you know, they had no idea. They probably thought they were going to be done soon, you know. So I told a few people, and then I just took off ahead of the group. And, you know, I needed to get back for some other services. And I think those devotees got back around 9 at night, and, you know, just completely bedraggled and hungry and exhausted, you know, and Padma was just so happy. You know, there are some devotees. I mean, he's left us, you know, some years ago. I'm sure he's, you know, in the spiritual realm, doing more, you know, going from place to place, because he's just a special soul. And anyway, you know, I'm mentioning these things of what keeps you going, what inspires, and I'm just so grateful for those times when there was much less traffic, you know, much more sandy areas, many peacocks and parrots, and, you know, not so many loudspeakers, because, you know, the feeling of, just walking around Govardhan, just leaving the material world. It's when I feel most myself, and just drop the false identity. We have nothing to show, nothing to prove. You're just a pilgrim, trying to walk towards Krishna, So, I highly recommend this form of nourishment. Everybody's got to find what nourishes them, and there are so many kinds of service, but I'm just sharing this one, because, we all have to see what keeps us ticking, because we are going to be challenges. There are going to be difficulties, one after another. And so these things help me. But as more and more, bad news about Europe poured in, and other parts of the world, but it was just I was more connected with Europe. So I remember I was sitting on the roof of the Krishna Balaram guest house, and Gopal Krishna Maharaj came up, and he told me the news that Ermenonville, the Paris temple, had been lost, and that the Arbre Soleil, the restaurant in Paris, had been lost, and that Radha Paraseshwara had been moved to New Mayapur. And so, this, was absolutely heart-shattering news. And many more things. So many of the Sankirtan devotees, I imagine there was, maybe 80 or 100 Sankirtan devotees in France. And those devotees had, they had been on constant marathons, as I explained in the last, some of the last videos about how we got all these properties and all these big temples so quickly. So these devotees, these unsung heroes, had been on constant marathons, and they were exhausted. And many of them, Bhagavan leaving and all these problems, guru issues and stuff, many of them just, dropped the ball, they went off to India or other places or other mutts, or just went home, or, leaving everything and just terrible financial situation. There's also a property next to New Mayapur, Godrum, that was also lost, and elsewhere, things going downhill, Spain, Italy, England. Well, England, was the second time around for them because they had gone through the difficulty of Jayatirtha. And I think they're a bit more resilient, having a different history. And so then I found out that there was a plan to sell New Mayapur. And this was just absolutely freaked me out. All these years of all this work, getting all these deities made and establishing and installations and, establishing standards and, all of these years of our youth, worked so hard to build up. And especially New Mayapur was, really a sacred place where Srila Prabhupada had walked all around and had loved and had installed those deities. And his rooms, where he had spent time, and I just could not bear to hear this, so I went to London. I assume I was in London probably for new visa or something, but there was a good friends of mine, Advaita Chandra and his wife Radha Sundari, who actually at that time they were Bhagavan's disciples. So Advaita, I think was Advaita Acharya maybe. Later he was reinitiated, called Advaita Chandra, and Radha Sundari was at that time Jai Shri. And Adwaita was a very capable, intelligent business person, and I begged him, please, can you try to do something? They also were, attached to New Mayapur, had some history there. And, what can we do? So he took that up very seriously. He got in touch with Bhakti True Maharaj. And in the meantime, myself and some other devotees, we started to gather quotes, things that Srila Prabhupada had said about moving deities and selling properties and stuff to try to build up a case. And this was taken to the GBC, a GBC meeting, and Bhakti True Maharaj, bless his soul, he worked hard. He made this, him and, Adwaita and other devotees got involved, and they started a whole campaign, and they did a lot of work, and they were dedicated for a few years it took them, and they really managed to save that property. I just feel so grateful to them. But, you imagine it was very, very difficult for those devotees, the few devotees who remained in New Mayapur. I'm just giving this example because that's where I was, that's what I'm familiar with. But there are many other examples of places that went through serious struggle, and there were devotees who really, went through so much to keep things going, had so much dedication to Srila Prabhupada, had worked so hard. He'd give his whole life, and he asked us one thing: please maintain what I started, even if you can't make it grow. So this is such a responsibility. So, I just feel so much, all glories to those devotees who stuck it out in this project and in others, because many of them, they underwent extreme austerities. They made a lot of sacrifice. And, that has not really been recognized. They haven't been recognized or honored for all of that. Not that they needed or wanted, but, some of them, they fell ill, they lost their health, because of the difficulties. But I know that Srila Prabhupada knows, and that they will be, they will be rewarded and blessed for what they did, For in New Mayapur, for a long time, there's this big, dark, cold castle, and for a long time there was no electricity, there was no hot water, and there were very, very few devotees, just the skeleton crew, who struggle, just to get enough to eat, and take care of the deities. And they did do it in the most wonderful way, Like if you saw how the deities, they just looked gorgeous every day. As if hundreds of people were going to come for darshan, and they're just, a few devotees, maybe 2 people were coming for darshan, So I just feel so grateful, and I just wish that future devotees could know, what it takes sometimes to keep things going, and also just to appreciate that there's so many devotees that are unknown, that are really, really glorious people, and really pure-hearted devotees, So, thinking about what was happening for me, like probably maybe 89, early on, it became necessary to dissolve the Institute for Vaishnava Studies that I was serving with, doing something for in Vrindavan, and it was very disappointing. But they had been getting funding from like Bhagavan Zone, Rameshwara Zone, they were being funded and they no longer, that kind of money wasn't coming in. So they had to stop the IVS work, so that was a little bit heartbreaking for me. But then I thought, I had so many materials that we had worked with, all these, biographies. And I thought, how can I keep going? Because this is so nourishing. How can I keep my mind absorbed in this? So I thought, well, I have these things. I could utilize what I have and maybe write some children's books. And so I had in my mind this series of children's books to tell about our previous acharyas, which, at that time, there was not so much known about them. So I thought to begin with Narottam Das Thakur, who was just a very attractive personality to me. And so I started that. It was just my own little project, and searching for other information, gathering books, and sometimes getting some, new translations done. And it just became a kind of a hobby for me that could keep me, out of I guess, and just keep absorbed in things that inspire me, As the changes of ISKCON were just going on all over the world, I'm hiding out in my little kutir. And, a big change that was happening here, 89, 90, 91, was what was going on in Russia. And that was a big thing, after Glasnost, and, there was the end of the persecution of the devotees in Russia. And, the devotees came out from the underground. And so then there was a huge growth immediately there. And so it became, a big preaching field, because now it's possible to go there. It's not so difficult. And with all the politics and difficulties in the West, I think it was attractive preaching field for many sannyasis and others, to spend time in Russia and those surrounding areas, because it was sort of the beginning of the movement there, and it was very blissful. I think by the early 90s, they had sold over 1 million, like Bhagavad Gitas in Russian, so this is exciting. And it had been going on for years, but, secretly and in a dangerous, it was dangerous, and now it was changing, And, Russian devotees being able to come out, and be in the open and to begin to travel. So this is a beginning of another big change in demographics of our movement, because, as you know, this would just sweep, we would, after a while, you find signs in Vrindavan in Russian, and you hear the shopkeepers speaking Russian, because so many Russians, they have to be able to communicate, So this is, it was a big change, changing time for ISKCON, one of the new era, Now, up to this point, that we really hadn't had much association or interaction with the Gaudiya Math. I remember on the first Brajmandal Parikrama, we ran into Narayan Maharaj also. He takes a very large group out, and somehow we came together out there, and it was very nice. And we had Narayan Maharaj spoke to the all group. It was translated in English, and it was very nice. So these are just, although I remember thinking, wow, he's talking to some very pretty high topics here. I don't know if he understands his audience, us foreign devotees. But, since Srila Prabhupada's departure, we had friendly relationships with Narayan Maharaj. He came once a year to Krishna Balaram Mandir, and we went once to his Mathura Mat, where Prabhupada took sannyas. I think Balaram's appearance day. Now, I recall going there to their mat and to take prasadam, and it was so surprising that the swamis, the sannyasis, served everyone. And I remember just kind of being shocked by that and feeling like really shy and humbled and respectful, as these, exalted devotees are, serving us young people. And it stood out in a kind of a stark contrast to many experiences that I had that were quite different, especially for ladies, sometimes not, getting all the preps or being served last or whatever. And I remember one time at the Mayapur festival that we were going out in Parikrama, so everyone was waiting outside for these buses to come. And there's a whole big group of ladies and a lot of kids out there, and it was hot and we were in the sun. And then, a group of sannyasis, our sannyasis, they all came out together and they just entered straight into, like a Mercedes AC van, and they drove off. And not to, I'm not criticizing this or, but, after considerable time, it was the ladies that were last, that got the most dilapidated bus with no windows, and, everybody was hot and the children were irritable and were thirsty by the time. So, I wondered, well, how could they do that? And then see these kids are hot and, it's not like a show of strength, the renunciation, and the point being is it just doesn't bring out the best in others, rather it's the opposite, I mean, I understand we respect our seniors and especially sannyasis and gurus and things like that, but the way it's done can, it just made us annoyed and less respectful mood, because it's just not detachment, to not notice that there's children, there's women that are maybe suffering, that it's insensitivity, and in the garb of renunciation, and it still goes on. I'm not trying to be, critical or envious of, the facilities that are given, but I'm just trying to point out, what is psychology that actually works, so that to bring out the best in everyone. Now, obviously, this is not the way it always was, and this is not. Actually, I had a totally opposite experience at Govardhan Palace when, I was sitting in a line with what you might say a few sort of heavy ladies, and one of the devotees there, this devotee man, was so dedicated to serving us, and he was wondering, well, why aren't you taking? Oh, you can't eat? Do you need fruit? And he was just running around doing, anything and everything possible. So I'm not saying like everybody, everyone was treated badly. No, he was very, very nice sometimes, But I could see that here's all these kind of strong women, and because of this one devotee's behavior towards them, they were all becoming like, covering their heads and just being grateful and very humble and thanking him. So as Srila Prabhupada used to say, it's just human psychology, proper human psychology, that there's a way to create a respectful environment, and bring out the best qualities in another person. So you could see that this is what a healthy culture of respect would look like, So I got a little deviated by that, but it's something we need to aspire for, developing a balanced culture of respect. It's not that respect is just for, one group. It's a culture of respect. So back to, I was talking about our interactions with Narayan Maharaj. Only mentioning just because, of course, it will become an issue. It becomes an issue. But this is just the first, my experiences at that time. And around this time, I remember having, just a friendly conversation with a friend, Jagatarini Dasi, who's a very wonderful devotee. She had a desire, she had such a taste for Vrindavan, and she wanted to write a book about the trees of Vrindavan, which sounded like a really nice project. And so she was going to Narayan Maharaj to ask him, you need other people to get information. It's like I was going here and there trying to get information about Narottam Das Thakur, And, so she was wondering, we were just chatting, and she said, well, you think it's okay that, I'm going there? And I was like, well, I don't see why not. It's, if you're just, going to get some information and, but of course, I guess, we have to be careful. Prabhupada was always cautioning, and there are, very good reasons why Prabhupada was cautioning, not because anybody, his other people are bad or, they're just very good reasons why to be cautious, They're just saying, well, I guess, have to be cautious. So this was, for me, the beginning of this connection where there was starting to be some relationships forming with Narayan Maharaj. So then, for me, moving on, in 89, still going back, still 89, I think it was, Gaur Purnima. I went for the Gaur Purnima festival. It was the first time I went on Navadvip Parikrama. It was like, oh, this is so short, just a week. And it was nice. And I remember I was chanting in the park. We used to have that lotus park. And Advaita Chandra, who I mentioned early, he came up to me and he said, I just want to tell you, I'm staying in a room right now with Hari Sauri. Do you know who Hari Sauri? Yeah, of course, everybody knows. Hari Sauri is Prabhupada's servant. And he said, well, he's interested in marrying you. And I was like, what? What? I don't even know him. He doesn't know me. And, it was a bit of a shock. But as I explained, I had felt that I had gotten some indication from Krishna, that I it was too late for that and not a good idea, just stick with what I'm doing. So I said, well, that's very surprising and, I'm honored, but no, you can tell him that I'm not interested. So, Advaita was like, yeah, I thought you might say that, So that was that. And then, but the next day he came back, Advaita, met me again. I was chanting japa, and he said, well, he doesn't seem to want to take no for an answer. I mean, I'm not going to tell all the stories about these things, but there's reasons why he felt like I was the right one. And he said he wondered if he could just, at least do charts, compatibility. And so I thought, well, I've always been told that I don't have a good chart for marriage. And so maybe if I give it, then he'll see. And then that'll be clear, and then we can just put it to rest. So, so I gave my details, and then I kind of just sort of forgot about it. And then a few days later, Adwaita comes back to me and he said, the charts are really good. That was very surprising, and that wasn't what I expected, But anyway, then we went back to Vrindavan, and Harisori was giving some talks he had started drafting his Transcendental Diaries, and he was giving talks in Srila Prabhupada's room. Now, I didn't want to seem interested, so, but I did want to hear, so I started listening to this seminar. It was, just so wonderful. And, it made me start wondering, I don't know, should I think about this or not? Certainly such a special person. And so he was going back to wherever, Australia or somewhere, and he just sent a message. He had sent some messages, very respectful way. He never tried to approach me or talk to me directly. And but he just left the ball in my court, and he said, I have said everything I can say. I'm totally interested, and I would really like to see this happen, but I'm leaving it to you. You can write to me, So, festival was over, and it was summertime, and this started pressing on me, and I started thinking about it more and more, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it because, you'd be done as a single woman in Vrindavan, that would be it. But by Krishna's mercy, Bhagavata Shraya, who was his wife, Sarvamangala, was a very close friend, and Bhagavat also a close friend, and he was very close with Harisori. So he just happened to make a quick trip to Vrindavan, so I was able to talk to him. And he explained to me, he knew all what Harisori had been through. He had been a sannyasi, he had been a GBC, and he had a sudden and unexpected fall down with a non-devotee one time, and she became pregnant. And he was advised by, other senior GBCs, look, this is what is called an accidental fall down. Just pick yourself up, do something to get more strong, and just forget about it and keep on, But he, because they said, if you admit to this, if you acknowledge this, you just lose everything, all your service. And, he had huge responsibilities as a GBC, and, a lot going on in his devotional life. And, but he, thought about it, and he said, no, I can't, I can't have people bowing down to me. And there is a child that I'm responsible for. And so he gave everything up. And he found himself, he said, well, I'll try to marry her and try to make her a devotee. And she thought, I'll marry him, try to make him a karmi, non-devotee. And it didn't work. So this was... he went through a lot of difficulty, and now his mood is that he just wants to rectify, and he wants to be in the good books of Srila Prabhupada again, and he's trying to figure out, he wants to do things properly, he wants to be, in a proper devotee marriage and do it right, and so I got to hear all of this, and I think, it's important that, not so much that someone falls down, it's not actually surprising, but what is most important is what it does to them. And, Srila Prabhupada's mood was always, you just Prabhupada didn't talk much about what happened, how did things happen, who was it, where was it, when was it, how many times. Prabhupada was always just very, just pick yourself up and keep going. Situate yourself in the best way for going forward, and you give the example of Gajendra. And this is not at all an easy thing to do. If you have been in a high position and you have been honored, many who have been in this situation have not been able to do that. They have not been able to really take a humble position and come back in a different spirit, So the fact that he was taking a humble position, I felt it really showed something of his dedication and his character. There's the quote, famous quote, that failure is not falling down, but it is refusing to get up. And so I began to feel that, this is a very, very special person. And maybe, like Bhagavat was like, why are you mental about this? This would be good. And he said, I don't want to, you're a grown adult, but, he's a very, very nice devotee, So I eventually wrote him that I was willing to explore the possibility. And, in those days you had to write letters, and it would take a couple of months or so, It was really hellish waiting for this reply. It took ages, I mean, in my heart, I was pretty sure that this is going to happen, but the mind was, very uncertain. So, I received his reply. This is interesting. I received his reply, and I came out, and I was walking down the road back to my kutir. And I was reading the letter as I was walking, and, basically it was, a full marriage proposal. And I just stopped in my tracks. My God, he's like just asking me to marry him, right here. And I stopped, and I just suddenly realized I have just stopped in this exact same spot where I had made this prayer, please always keep me in the company of your sincere servants. And, I couldn't help but see this synchronicity that here is the servant of Srila Prabhupada asking, and suggesting, that we have this association together, So it was quite, a moment of, oh my gosh. And so we did agree to meet. I went to London. He came to London, and with a short period of time, very short, we just decided to get married. And then again, this might sound crazy. You're marrying somebody you've hardly spent any time. But, I could see it was inevitable. And, it was at my age, I was like, well, let's just get on with it, So I have to mention a funny thing is that I realized suddenly that I'm still legally married to Nartamananda 20 years ago. And, I just never had the need to. We just, drifted away, and I never had the need to. So I went to see a lawyer, and she said, so what are the grounds, for this divorce? And I said, well, it's never been consummated. And if you could have seen the hysterical look on her face, she takes a glass, she was, oh my God. Now I've heard everything. After 20 years, well, no wonder. And she was laughing. I mean, I explained how it went, And she said, well, normally this is not considered a marriage. It would just be annulled. But, it's so rare that so much time has passed that we have to actually do the divorce. She said, but just get a letter from him, and if he says this is true, then, it'll be instant, So we did that. It was funny. But at this time, it was very important for Harisori to really do things right. He wanted blessings of the devotees, the blessings of the deities, because he'd been through such trauma, and it had been very difficult. And, I was kind of, wanted to just do some little thing and quiet, but it was important for him. So we had our marriage in front of Radha Landanishwara, and our dear friend Bhagavata Shraya did the yajna, and so many wonderful devotees, great friends, they all came, and they were so supportive, and they're so kind and helpful. Here we are, it's just a very odd situation, and yet, the devotees were just very kind to us, and supporting. So we didn't have a clear plan yet, but we went to Vrindavan for Kartik because I had to continue my deity work. And, there was an intense schedule always to keep up with. And we had agreed, I explained, this is important to me. This is my seva from many years. I've developed it. And where we're going to go or whatever, we can figure it out. But I need to go to India twice a year. And he's like, yeah, of course, just we have to figure out how we can do that. And, we had both been very transient people in many places and doing a variety of services, and that's just the way we had lived up till then, so it seemed natural. And he was offered a service at the Back to Godhead as, I think, like managing director or something in San Diego. So that seemed like interesting. So we first went to Australia because we had to collect some funds and some other things had to be done. And it was my first visit to Australia. And of course, this is another place to see what had transpired. That almost all the devotees in Australia were Bhavananda's disciples. And so this had been absolutely devastating to this country. To ISKCON in that country, because they really loved him. They really, really loved him and were dedicated to him, and things were going on well there, so it was difficult. It was a difficult time, but I went to Sydney, and then we went to New Govardhan, which is just an amazing and wonderful project that Harisori had been involved with when they were purchased it in 75, I guess. So we were selling paintings to get some funds to be able to go to the USA. And one thing that my husband did while I was there, which I was impressed by, because he had been the GBC there, and there were people that didn't necessarily welcome him back, that he had years, not that long, but he had spent time outside, living, trying to make it work with a non-devotee woman, and wondering and pondering, how did this happen? What happened to me? And he realized after that he had really had a nervous breakdown. He was trying to understand. I was trying so hard, how did it happen? And then he came to understand that he had made so many unintentional offenses that he was not necessarily even aware of, because, there was a tendency to, a wrong way of thinking that the end justifies the means. Whatever you have to do to get the service done, you just get it done. If you have to step on someone's head to do it, well, so be it, So this is a common immature error of the era. That to manage, managing, can be very dangerous, how you're thinking. And then you eventually receive the results of offenses, and this has happened to many, 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 many devotees. But what I was impressed by is that, he understood that he had done things to offend devotees. He'd thought about it deeply. And so each temple where we went after Mangalarti, he asked if he could speak out to the devotees, and he made public apology that if he had offended, or whoever he had offended, to please forgive him, because he just wants to serve Prabhupada. And, devotees are kind. If someone is remorseful, then they're willing. But sometimes people are not remorseful, or not willing to see how they did hurt people, and not willing to acknowledge that they did hurt people. And so, the fact that he did this showed sincerity. And so, for the most part, devotees were, appreciated that he did that. And some of them did inform him of things that he had done that had hurt. And so, he had to swallow things. But, if we're sincere, then we'll swallow what Krishna shows us, where we're making mistakes, or what we've done in the course of our service. So we moved on. We went to San Diego, back to Godhead. And this is my first time back in America for, very decades. And San Diego Temple is a beautiful temple with a lot of nice devotees. And at that time, Back to Godhead magazine was situated there, and also the Bhaktivedanta Institute was there, Sadhuputta and other devotees. So it was nice. It was a nice place to be. And San Diego, it was just a nice place to be. And I want to just mention, because, Back to Godhead, Srila Prabhupada said it's the backbone of our movement. That's a very strong statement, and he said that more than once. The Back to Godhead magazine was just so important to Srila Prabhupada. And I'm not sure that devotees nowadays understand how important it was, and how, like in the 70s, at the height of circulation, they were printing, 500,000 BTGs at a time, I think. It wasn't subscriber based, it was distributed on the streets. Now, gradually, as different types of Sankirtan evolved, the small books were produced, and then that seemed like a easier, better kind of introduction, and perhaps cheaper to produce for Sankirtan. So Back to Godhead was kind of taking a back seat, had taken a back seat, and there was more and more decline throughout the 80s. So now in the early 90s, it was drastically cut circulation. So, there was an attempt. That's why, we were called there. They were trying to start new things, do new things, make it subscription driven and targeting a different audience. They're trying to focus, change it from an introductory magazine to appealing for those who are already interested also, So that was the idea. But it's important. I'm mentioning this because, things get forgotten over time. But we shouldn't forget those things that were very, very important to Srila Prabhupada. And he said, the backbone of the movement. Whew, you know. So they were trying to rebrand it, revamp it, you know, and do it a little differently. So we were going to take part in that, and I was going to find something to do there. You know, I was okay with typing and doing this. So so that was kind of an office job that we were going to do. And now in the meantime, you know, at some point I'd gone back to India on my own and passed through London, and I was starting to hear more and more about what was that there were these, you know, senior devotees, very, very respected, highly respected devotees, were frequently visiting Narayan Maharaj. And, you know, it seemed like it was a little secretive and like a bit of an elite group. And some devotees were calling it, you know, the second Gopi Baba Club kind of thing. And so I was just hearing these things. So, you know, I just mentioned it in passing to my husband when I came back. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj happened to be there. Maybe it was in LA, not sure. But I didn't expect it. But my husband went, you know, straight to him and said, oh, this is, my wife told me, blah, 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 this is what people are saying. So then he called for me, and we had a little chat. And well, he was quite dismissive of what I was saying, and I think he was kind of hinting that maybe I was envious. It was a common way of silencing people, you know. But he said, I don't think there's a big problem going on, and you know. So that was that, you know. Anyway, the BTG working there was it was a great learning experience, but we knew after some time it's just not what we wanted. You know, it was kind of this sedentary office job, and it's not what either of us had ever done throughout the years. We've both been, you know, active and moving around, and you know, and so. Also, Harisori wanted to write and, you know, focus on doing these transcendental diaries. And so we decided to move to Alachua. And we were trying to have children, and that was very important to him to try to do that right also. So I know it was Kartik 1991. You know, I was starting to think, wow, you know, I'm getting old here, you know, if I'm going to get pregnant, should get this happening soon, you know. So I remember that, you know, the timing was right, but we were still in Vrindavan, and we thought, well, let's just go right outside of Braj. Some things you just want to keep outside of the Dham. So we went somewhere. Of course, later we found out that it was not actually outside the Dham, but anyway, the following morning, we took a trip to Radhakund. We were going to go to Radhakund and then to Delhi and, you know, back to America. And so when I recall very vividly that when we were walking into Radhakund, I suddenly had a very, very clear, I don't know, inspiration. I don't know what you would call it, but I thought, I am pregnant. And sure enough, that was a fact. And that was a shock, and that was scary, and that was exciting. So, despite, you know, we went back to America, and despite being 42 and pregnant, I still went back to India for my deity work at Gaur Purnima time, and Harisori came also, and we went to Mayapur for the Gaur Purnima festival. And so daily we were going out on parikrama, and Bhakti True Maharaj was a little surprised, you know, someone my age and in this condition was there, and he so kindly gave us his servant's room. He wanted us to be comfortable and protected, you know, he's such a gentleman. And but you know, I just had this maybe it didn't make material sense, you know, to be traveling and doing these things, but it made spiritual sense to me. And you know, because as soon as you know that you have another living entity to take care of, you just want to give all auspiciousness to benefit that soul, you know. So I just had this very deep feeling of responsibility to give every opportunity for purification to the soul, you know. So what could be better than to get Mahaprabhu's mercy, you know, in Sridham Mayapur on Parikrama. So this was my daughter's first Parikrama in the womb. And interestingly, you know, we made it a regular, even as she was a toddler and everything, we made it a regular thing. And then as soon as she got big enough, she just did that. And she became like a Parikrama addict. I don't think she's ever missed, you know, except for COVID and, you know, yeah, I think that's all, you know. So I think these things really do, you know, impact even when, you know, there's a soul in the womb, you know. I also got a little small cassette player that could fit into a little like money belt and played Prabhupada all the time, you know. And so, you know, this is how we try to spread Krishna consciousness to the child in the womb, you know. So we got a place in Alachua and, you know, finished up in California. And I decided to go to England for the birth. And that was also probably radical, but there are many reasons why. And I would have to go alone because Harisari had to do a number of things. And he was finishing up the first volume to get ready for printing of Transcendental Diary, Volume 1. And so I went to stay on the floor of this tiny little room of my very dear friend Sita. And she so kindly made space for me. And, you know, I just had no regrets. It just was wonderful. In the UK has a wonderful health system where you can be at the hospital but like have a midwife situation. And so that if the need is there, and there was a need in the end. So, you know, no matter how much you talk to mothers or you read books, nothing can prepare a person for the experience of having a living entity emerge from your body. No matter how old you are or how experienced you are, it is just shocking. And, you know, I just had this immediate, overwhelming respect. I gained so much respect for all mothers after going through this experience. You know, I just felt like I wanted to bow to them. Wow, you did this like it was nothing, and you did it 3 or 4 or 5 times, just unbelievable. You know, but anyway, I had tremendous support there. So many wonderful devotees at the manor at that time. Just they made a roster to cook for us and to help out, and Rama Devi and Pratima, she gave us her house to stay in. It was right next to the hospital. It was just, you know, Krishna just, Prabhupada created this amazing family of devotees that are such a shelter. And of course, Harisari did make it there and on time. And so in this year of 92, you know, we produced the 2 wonders, you know, Transcendental Diary, Volume 1, and Our Daughter Rasarani. Now, you know, at my age, you know, I was quite uncertain. I had no experience. I'd never taken care of children. But it was very natural. And Harisari was an incredible, wonderful help. Just just very spontaneous and very natural. And we had some difficulties with her. She had a little difficulties, but no issues, just very smooth. And so life really continued on, sort of normally. I mean, it's a tremendous change, but continued to travel. And even by the time she was 6 months old, we were in Vrindavan again and at Vrindakund. And there, Dinabandhu gave her in front of Vrindadevi Maha sweet rice. That was before the marble deity came, the previous deity of Vrindadevi. And that property, that incredible property, had recently been given to ISKCON by Madhava Baba. It's just amazing, important tirtha. That the Gupta Kund that is also there is one of the 3 yoga pits in Vrindavan. So this was a wonderful, to just be very regularly and constantly able to, give spiritual nourishment to a soul that had come into our lives. And I think I'm trying to, maybe I should stop here. Yes, I have much more to say about these years, so I guess this will be continued. I'll try to continue this later because it's maybe too much for people. Now, I mean, people might think, God, she's just telling us all about her marriage and her baby and all this stuff. What the heck? How is this relevant, But, I just feel that these are practical life, of all devotees, things that we go through. How do we manage them? How do we change? How did life change? And I will get into that much more in the continuing about, the next era of ISKCON and how it really changed radically, with the focus on family and children. So I will begin there next time. I hope this wasn't all just terribly boring for people. But, you just have to go through the whole thing, either do it or don't do it. So I hope there's something of interest. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.